it's a different perspective about Shakespeare. It humanizes him. And she writes beautifully. She writes so well. So, this one is called This is Shakespeare by Emma Smith. Just a side note on the author. Emma Smith is a professor of Shakespeare studies at Oxford University. She has published widely on Shakespeare and other early modern dramatists, and she lives in Oxford, England. Of course, I needed to say that because I wanted to let you know the credibility of the author of the book, and she is clearly an authority on Shakespeare. It's about Shakespeare, obviously. No, but kidding aside, it's about, so basically Emma Smith, the professor Emma Smith, she picked some of the more famous works of Shakespeare, and she dissected them in each parang, so each chapter is dedicated to one famous work of Shakespeare, and it's just short lang. Each chapter is short and crisp and straight to the point, so she doesn't dilly-dally on whatever comments. She just goes straight to it. She dissects it, and she kind of gives you a different perspective of Shakespeare and what and why he wrote that story or that stage play at the time. So it's very interesting. It's a very interesting take because it's a fresh perspective. It's a fresh take on Shakespeare. So some of the stories that she talked about here is Taming of the Shrew, which is one of the more known Shakespeare work. Of course, Romeo and Juliet, Midsummer Night's Dream. Asan na yung gusto ko dito? Much Ado About Nothing. And I like Much Ado About Nothing because it's one of the plays that we did back in my high school, which I wrote yung script. But anyway, as an example would be, let's say Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is one of the most well-known Shakespeare works. It has been done a lot of times in movies, in TV series, in stage plays everywhere in the world. And it's a famous, like love story of two star-crossed lovers in fair Verona. And it's about a story of young love and sweet love trying to fight for your love even with rival families, diba? But in this book, in This is Shakespeare with Emma Smith, she kind of digs a little deeper. She challenges that perspective or that impression that it's just about young love. It's not really just about young love. It's really about a lesson saying that when you're young people really don't know what they're talking about, or young people really don't know about real love yet. So she is proposing that the real message of Romeo and Juliet is actually that adolescents and young kids shouldn't really be carried away by their emotions because it would probably not end well. Parang ganyan. So it's a funny take. It's an insightful take on each of the Shakespeare stories, and definitely it's a different perspective. So I thought that was fun. When we watch Romeo and Juliet, especially, I really love the Baz Luhrmann Romeo and Juliet movie. One of the best, one of my all-time favorite movies. And alam mo yun, parang it's such a stunning movie, such a stunning play. When you read it, ang sarap niyang pakinggan, ang sarap niyang i-recite, even half the time you don't know what they're talking about, but still, it's just, you love listening to it. But, yun nga, in all of that, Emma Smith, she kind of peels away she peels the onion and kind of tells you and reveals a more insightful and a deeper view into a popular subject, parang ganyan. She does the same for the rest of the stories, actually. You have to keep in mind that the author is an expert on Shakespeare studies, right? She teaches Shakespeare. It's her life work. So you could imagine how much how many times she's read it and how much research she must have done on the subject. She teaches it. So that gives her kind of a broader view on Shakespeare, on his work. So the way she writes it actually is that in each chapter here, she tells you what was the economic and political climate at the time that Shakespeare wrote that story. At what point did Shakespeare write that story? At what point did what was the situation in England at the time? Who was his inspiration? Who did he copy? What was the original context of the story? So yun yung binibigay niya. That's what she gives. She gives you an additional information that normally you wouldn't know about, right? So it gives you a different kind of appreciation of the Shakespeare story. And another thing about her, I guess, is that she talks about Shakespeare in a very balanced way. You could tell that she admires Shakespeare and respects Shakespeare's work, but at the same time, she humanizes him. She humanizes him in a way na, he's not this glorified writer who's a genius in ganyan. He can be that, but he's also human. He has his failings. He takes inspiration from his peers, from his colleagues. Hindi naman lahat yan parang just originally came from him. Not really. Some of his early works, of course, hindi pa siya masyadong kilala. He wasn't known yet at the time, but through, he probably was one of the first writers who made stage production, stage drama, like a thing in a fad. It's a form of entertainment for the nobility, and not just the nobility. It's a form of entertainment for everybody, period. The only difference is that the setting, right? So Shakespeare would sometimes perform, tawag ito, mas accessible to everybody, and sometimes he would perform just for the nobility, for the monarchy. But he's one of the first writers, I think, who really made a career out of it. And he wrote his stories really for the stage. He wrote it for the stage. That's why if you read it now, it's difficult to understand because he doesn't really give, that's one of the things about Shakespeare. He doesn't really give stage direction. He's just going to write very short description of what's happening on the stage, but he focuses more on the dialogue of the characters, of the actors on the stage, but he doesn't give you stage direction. Unlike now, diba, when you write a playwright or when you write a screenplay, halos nagsusulat ka na ng nobela kasi i-describe na ng writer na kung anong the writer would describe what the actor is feeling, what is he thinking, parang ganyan. Shakespeare didn't write that way. He just writes the dialogue and then it's up to the stage director to interpret what it means, parang ganyan. It definitely gives you a new perspective about Shakespeare, gives you a new appreciation of his works. For me, I enjoyed it because I love Shakespeare. So it kind of gives you a new perspective about Shakespeare. For me personally, I enjoyed reading it because I love Shakespeare. He is one of the first he's one of the first literary legends that I got to know even way back when I was a kid. So reading this was like a trip down memory lane for me. I would not recommend this book for those who do not know Shakespeare yet. The best way, or maybe the better way to enjoy this book is if you already know the works of Shakespeare, especially the ones that she's going to talk about. But there are some here that are not too well known, like Comedy of Errors, Richard II, Winter's Tale, The Tempest. Yun yung mga medyo not known. So when you get to those chapters that you haven't read yet, you probably wouldn't enjoy it as much as the other stories, right? And so it's a little deeper. It's a deeper look. I would recommend that you read Shakespeare's work first. For me personally, I think that's the best way. I couldn't imagine. I don't know, because I read Shakespeare and then I read this, so I have that perspective. But I can't imagine how would it be like for for somebody who has no idea about Shakespeare. Like, for example, yung, meron dito like, meron siya, Richard III yata. Oo. Richard III. I haven't read the Richard III work of Shakespeare. So when I read it here, when she started talking about it here, I appreciated it, pero I couldn't appreciate it as much as I appreciated the other chapters that I know about. In conclusion, it's a really good book. It's a really, really insightful book about Shakespeare. If you love Shakespeare, you will love this. If you know Shakespeare's work, you will love this. It's a different perspective about Shakespeare. It humanizes him. And she writes beautifully. She writes so well. It's like her words are like, it's so lyrical. It flows. It's almost like, it almost feels like it's nice to read aloud because she just writes beautifully. Straight to the point, but very, lyrical. Ang galing lang. So, I enjoyed it. If you love Shakespeare, you should read this. Yun lang. Thank you.